Welcome back, Twisters. Nick here, and today I'm going to be talking about my last 25 years watching the Stanley Cup, and then we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming Stanley Cup toward the end. So this is a fun one because I'm going to be sharing who I've been cheering for the last 25 years, or I guess kind of like 24 years if you count out the lockout, and that way you can see sort of where my allegiances have lay over the last couple of decades here. So this is going to be a fun one. Let me know down in the comments below if there's anybody you've cheered for that you just do not want to ever see lift the cup again. And let's have some fun with this one. Leave a thumbs up, sub if you haven't already. Let's jump into it. So I first started watching the Stanley Cup around 1996. I think that's the first time I tuned in, maybe 1995. In that case, I probably would have rooted for the Devils over the Red Wings. But in 1996, I liked the Colorado Avalanche a little bit, even though they had a rivalry with my favorite team, the San Jose Sharks. I just liked the jerseys and the logo back then, and I said, all right, let's go for the Avalanche. I think I had seen them in person by then, so I cheered for them, and they won against the Panthers. Then the next 2 years, guys, this is where some disappointment will lie, because I did actually kind of like the Red Wings a little bit as well. So you're going to see that I did kind of jump on a couple of bandwagons. But the reason behind that was, well, first of all, I was a wee lad, so I wouldn't know better. And number two, I had these figurines. I don't know if any of you collected them. They're called headliners. I don't know if they had them in Canada. I would think they would have. These like little figurines with giant heads. And so there would be players like Chris Chelios and Steve Yzerman and Nick Lidstrom and Patrick Waugh, if we're talking about the Avalanche, and Martin Brodeur. So I remember having a lot of those players who found their way in the Stanley Cup final. So that's why I think I gravitated to the Red Wings. And I liked their logo back then too. So I cheered for them as they won back-to-back cups over the Flyers and then the Capitals. 1999. This one I was cheering for the Buffalo Sabres as they took on the Dallas Stars. But as we know, the Stars won in Game 6 in overtime. Foot in the crease. And I cheered for the Sabres because even though I didn't care for them at the time, I just did not like the Stars whatsoever. I grew up hating the Dallas Cowboys, and I still don't care for them. And also, I think the Stars and the Sharks had already formed a rivalry in that division as well. So that's why it wasn't that I was cheering for Buffalo, I was just cheering against Dallas. And next year, 2000, it was kind of like that as well. But I cheered for the Devils, and they won their second Stanley Cup in their franchise's history there. So that was a great series. So I was really happy the Devils won. I couldn't see the Stars winning back-to-back. The next year, the Devils went back to the Cup final, but this time I actually cheered for the other team because that was the Avalanche. So in terms of like good teams from that era, my favorite was probably the Avalanche over the Red Wings, I would think. And then somewhere, I don't know if it would be the Devils and then the Red Wings, but there you have it. I cheered for Colorado. And of course, Raymond Bourque raised the Stanley Cup in Game 7 there in one of the greatest moments in not just Stanley Cup history, but just hockey history and even sports history. 2002, again, it wasn't that I was a huge Red Wings fan. It's just I had no problem with them winning their first two cups. So I did root for them against the Hurricanes. And I was just like, Hurricanes? Like, what the heck is that? And what is that logo? And so I cheered against Carolina there. But don't worry, Canes fans. I redeemed myself a little bit later. For the 2003 final, I was cheering for the Devils as they took on the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. And the reason why I was cheering for the Devils here was because the Mighty Ducks had knocked off my one of my other favorite teams, I guess, the Minnesota Wild, who won on this crazy run to the conference final. But unfortunately, Anaheim got the best of them. But nonetheless, back then I didn't hate the Ducks, actually, or the Mighty Ducks, I should say. In the Mighty Ducks era, I liked them just fine. But that would change a little bit later. And then 2004, this was one where I was like, you guys had better win. And that was the Tampa Bay Lightning outlasting the Calgary Flames in another great 7-game series there. So the Flames had knocked off the Sharks in the conference final, so I was like bitter about that, of course. And I was happy that Tampa prevailed there, even though we all know Calgary really had that game 6. Yeah, but nonetheless, a good series there. On to the 2006 season, as the 05 season was null due to the lockout. So I was cheering for the Hurricanes as they beat the Edmonton Oilers. And did that go 7 games as well? I think it did. And the Oilers went on a miraculous run, kind of like what Montreal is on right now. But they knocked off my Sharks in the second round along the way there. And I thought that we were going to go out there and probably get to the final, but unfortunately that was not the case. Not to mention, I was extra bitter about this hit that Rafi Torres threw at center ice. He elbows Milan Mihalik deliberately in the head. Mihalik is out for the rest of the series. He had a pretty good season for the Sharks there, so I was happy that Carolina got the best of them. Now the 2007 final, and I was pulling hard for the Ottawa Senators, and the reason why was because they were taking on not just the team in Anaheim, but now that team was just called the Ducks. So no more Mighty Ducks, no more Eggplant and Jade. They had these a pretty ugly rebrand, to be frank, and now they had Chris Pronger on their team. And if Sharks fans know a thing or two about rivalries, we hate Chris Pronger wherever he goes, even though he was, Hall of Fame player and whatnot. So yeah, I was cheering hard for the Senators, but they were just completely outclassed. I wasn't too surprised that Anaheim won that. 2008. So remember how I was cheering for the Red Wings in the late 90s and the early 2000s? That changes entirely. So I finally woke up. I finally understood that Sharks are not supposed to like the Red Wings. So I'm pulling for Pittsburgh. Anyway, Pittsburgh loses to the Red Wings. It's still a pretty good series. But then the next year, the Penguins get revenge. And of course, I'm still cheering for them in Game 7. And Marc-Andre Fleury, diving over to make that save at the very end. I remember that so well. I was very happy about that. So the Red Wings had beaten the Sharks in 2007 in the playoffs. So that added fuel to the fire there. 2010. This one stings a little bit. So, they completed a reverse sweep in the first round. The Philadelphia Flyers made a tremendous run. Peter Laviolette, he brought the Hurricanes to the Cup in 2006. First year coaching the Flyers, I believe, and then they go to the Stanley Cup. But they got to face the Blackhawks. And not only have the Blackhawks dominated en route to a Stanley Cup final berth, but they've beaten my Sharks. And they didn't just beat my Sharks. They swept them. It was embarrassing. I believe that was maybe as embarrassing as our loss the year before when we won the President's Trophy against the Ducks. I mean, that was a couple of bad years. And to add insult to injury, I was actually living in Chicago. However, at the time that the Hawks actually won the Cup, I was back home. So I think I was still back home for when they had the parade and everything. I just said, I don't want anything to do about that. Anyway, the next year, so I rooted for the Bruins, and as a lot of you know, I'm not a Bruins fan. I don't like the Bruins. My animosity toward them has died down a little bit, but I was definitely pulling for them against the Canucks. I think in 2011, unless you were a Canucks fan, you hated the Canucks because of players like, let's see, Kessler, Burrows. Did they have Torres at that time? At some point they did. Kessler, Burrows, who's the other guy? Bieksa. Although for some reason I liked Bieksa. But nonetheless, I was pulling hard for Boston. They prevailed in 7 games. So anyway, I was glad about that. And the Canucks had beaten the Sharks in the conference finals. So that's really what was the icing on the cake for me. 2012. I didn't even watch this one because I was just like, how? The LA Kings beat the New Jersey Devils. Of course, I'm cheering for the Devils because I'm a Sharks fan. So plain and simple there. Kings, as an 8th seed, win the Stanley Cup. Unbelievable run. And just they were very dominant in that postseason run as well. 2013. This one's interesting. It's a lockout shortened season. And the Bruins make the Stanley Cup final. And it's happening just after the, now what is celebrated, I believe, is Patriots Day, the day of the bombing at the Boston Marathon. I was okay if they won that, but I actually cheered for the Blackhawks in this one because I was like, okay, I can kind of shake off 2010. And I lived in Chicago. I got a couple friends there. So I said, all right, we'll cheer for the Hawks here. But I really didn't care that much, honestly. It was probably the most apathetic I've been in a Stanley Cup final. And so the Blackhawks won that series. Then in 2014, oh man, we're really having a fun time down memory lane, aren't we? So the Los Angeles Kings are down 3-0 in the first round against these guys. And yeah, reverse sweep. I don't even think I watched the rest of the playoffs really. So I was pulling for the Rangers, of course, and the Kings win. Alec Martinez in, I think, overtime, right, scores the winning goal. Kings, just the way that they've won their 2 Stanley Cups is remarkable, though. So even though I believe that animosity for them will build again, I actually kind of miss the Kings being good, as long as my Sharks are good too. I miss that rivalry. It was a little bit different than what you've seen between the Sharks and Vegas, or at least in the moment, that's kind of how I see it. But that may change in hindsight as well. So in 2015, I could have rooted for the Blackhawks, but I was just like, man, I am so sick of the Blackhawks and the Kings every year in the final. The Bruins have been in it a couple times. We need a new matchup here. So the Hawks make it again, and I'm cheering for the Lightning, and the Blackhawks win that. I mean, I knew that was going to happen anyway, so I didn't really care too much. But then the next year happened. We were not supposed to make it out of the first round. We were supposed to get blown away, and we win in 5. We were supposed to lose in the conference final. We win that in 6 convincingly. And my San Jose Sharks go to the Stanley Cup final against the Pittsburgh Penguins, who, like the Sharks, were out of a playoff spot a couple months into the season. And they fired, was it Bilesma at that time? Then they brought in Mike Sullivan, former San Jose Shark Mike Sullivan. And the Penguins just outclassed San Jose. They kicked their butts, really. Martin Jones and overtime goal from Jonas Donskoy. That's the difference between this being a clean sweep and a 6-game series. I got to go to game 6, or excuse me, not game 6, game 4. Doesn't really make a difference because we lost both of them. Anyway, then the next year, the Predators go up against the Penguins. The Penguins almost get knocked out in the conference final, but Ottawa, oh man, the Kunitz goal. I mean, that's pretty iconic, I have to say. So the Penguins win that one. I didn't even watch that cup because I was in New Orleans for a few days, and I just didn't really feel like it. I wanted to watch the Warriors win a championship that year instead. They beat the Cavaliers, and so I was cheering for the Dubs back then. I mean, they're still my team, but not as much now. Anyway, but I got to say, though, I had animosity toward Crosby and the Penguins, and even that has rubbed off considerably. I'd still say that they're my kind of least favorite in that division, and like the Bruins are my least favorite in the Atlantic, but I don't have as much animosity for them as I used to. Speaking of animosity, though, we get to 2018. So the Vegas Golden Knights win the division. They just spank the hell out of every team in that division. They beat the LA Kings at their own game in the first round. Then they dismantle my San Jose Sharks in 6 games. I swear, if Fleury didn't have that lovely glove save in overtime in Game 3, the Sharks would have been there in the Stanley Cup instead. We could have had the Sharks and the Capitals. It would have been epic. Anyway, speaking of the Capitals, so they've got the Pittsburgh Penguins in round 2, and oh man, when Yevgeny Kuznetsov gets on that breakaway in Game 6, woo! Oh, so lovely. I said, damn, maybe this team actually does have it in them. Then they have to play Tampa, who is, 1 year away from tying the record for wins. And they prevail. They're down 3-2 in the series, and they win in 7 games. And so I'm all caps, baby, right? And so seeing Ovechkin and Oshie especially win the Stanley Cup, one of my favorite hockey moments I've seen. I didn't get to obviously see it in person, and because of that, I've got Alex Ovechkin here, especially coming against the Golden Knights. When I was cool with Vegas coming into the league, and I mean I still am, right? But I didn't think I would be as salty and jealous right away. But anyway, that's 2018. 2019 was an interesting one because the team that won the Stanley Cup eliminated my Sharks in the playoffs there. But I was cheering for them before the season started. I did like a team ranking, my favorite 1 to 31, and this team was number 5, and that was the Blues. And one of the reasons why I was liking the Blues was because of the Ryan O'Reilly acquisition. Alex Pietrangelo, at least when he was in St. Louis, was my favorite defenseman outside of my favorite team. Actually, maybe my favorite or probably like second or third favorite player in the league. So I was pulling pretty hard for St. Louis, even though they knocked off the Sharks. I could certainly talk about that series some more, but at the end of the day, we got outclassed. I know we were banged up, but I said, all right, you know what? I can turn the page, whatever. We had a good season anyway. And the Blues faced the Bruins in a great 7-game series, and they come out on top. So, I'm always happy to kind of revisit that run that they made, because especially before that season started, I predicted the Blues to win the Stanley Cup when not too many people were doing that. So that was a bit of a feather in my cap there. And then last year, the bubble series, I cheered for the Stars over the Tampa Bay Lightning. I never was a Stars fan, as you can tell. But my animosity for them totally died down when they moved out of the Central Division, when they moved to the Central Division instead of having to play my Sharks more often in the season. So I was pulling for Dallas, especially for Joe Pavelski, of course. But nonetheless, even though Tampa won, I was happy to see Barclay Goodrow, right? The hero in Game 7 against Vegas. I was happy to see him raise the Stanley Cup and be a really good depth piece for that team and just do some things that I think Tampa was missing going into the 2019 playoffs there. So my overall record here, when you look at teams I've cheered for, I've come out pretty good. I'm 14-10. I like that. But nonetheless, I got 9 out of my first 10 desires, I guess. 9 of the first 10 teams I wanted to win. It happened when I was, much younger. This is before I go off to college, actually. And then ever since, I've only won, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of like 14 or 15 different Stanley Cups. So speaking of Stanley Cups, I am pulling for the Montreal Canadiens in this series. And what's interesting about this is that Tampa is about as far away as you can get from where I live right now in North Idaho, basically Spokane. And a lot of people here are going to be cheering for Tampa because Tyler Johnson was a Spokane Chief. He grew up in this area too. I think he might even have grown up actually in Idaho, but I mean, Spokane and North Idaho, basically similar places. They're all part of the same area. So a lot of people will pull for Tampa. I remember moving here in October and I took my dog to the park and I saw a guy in a Tampa shirt. So that's kind of the way it is here, but nonetheless, I'm pulling for Montreal. And as some of you know, I actually picked the Habs at the beginning of the regular season, not the postseason. I went back on my word there. But at the beginning of the regular season, I said Montreal was going to go to the Stanley Cup final in an improbable run. I thought that team was going to finish second in the division. I think they would have maybe finished there if they didn't fire Julien, or maybe third. But nonetheless, they got it done. They've been playing kind of like the team I thought they would. I just like the mix of the veterans they had, the skilled players like Danault, guys who've been around the league for a little while, like Toffoli, that acquisition. The Sharks could have had him, but overpaid for Kevin Labanc instead. And then, of course, you have talents like Nick Suzuki and then Cole Caulfield. I didn't think he was going to break in the way that he has, but he looks magnificent out there too. So I still think the Bolts are going to win this series, even without Kucherov. They won a Stanley Cup last year without Stamkos. Vasilevsky is playing amazing, and he hasn't had to work that much either. And Montreal is not a team that gets a ton of pucks to the net. So that's why I think Tampa's going to win. I still think the Habs are going to put up a fight. A majority of the last Stanley Cup finals have been decided in 6 games, so I would probably think it'll be Tampa in 6. I think that's how they won it last year. So I'm still cheering for the Habs nonetheless. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I just wanted to have some fun and let you guys know my history in terms of watching the Stanley Cup final over the last 25 years. Hope you enjoyed this one. Make sure you leave a thumbs up if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out the video description if you want to follow me on Instagram or on Twitter. And you can also see where to find our merch store. Thank you so much for tuning in, Twisters. Once again, I'm Nick, and I'll catch you later. Au revoir.